Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Holly Starkey, Fantasy Story Editor. I edit all subgenres of fantasy. So I hope you are having an amazing day, and in today's video I'm going to be continuing my world building series, and I'm going to focus on how many species you should have in your novel. So this channel mainly focuses on fantasy, but if you are a science fiction author, then a lot of these world building series videos will also apply to you, but I just don't use science fiction examples because I mainly focus on fantasy in this on this channel. So when an author comes to me and I'm helping them develop their story, or they're asking me a question, sometimes I always suggest, not sometimes, but I always suggest, I can't think of a time I haven't done this, but I always suggest that they keep the core species in their story to 3 or less. And let me explain what I mean by that. Is because when you are developing your story world and you're creating all your species, you can have a story world populated with dozens of species, different types of people, and things like that. But you should really just focus on 3 or less, unless you are a very experienced fantasy writer, because for all your core people, you need to have a fleshed out history, culture, society, core values, beliefs, all that needs to be fleshed out. And if you have a story where you have a core of half a dozen characters, not half a dozen characters, but oh my gosh, I can't speak, half a dozen species, then, and I'm not going to edit that out because I'm human, so yeah, I trip over words sometimes. If you have a novel with a core group of half a dozen species, then that is a lot of work to go ahead and fully flesh out all those people. Because think about this. If, let's say, you just have 3 core species, and each of those species should have diversity within the group. So you're going to have, for instance, socioeconomic differences. You're going to have differences, and that's going to lead to differences in values and beliefs, and also based off a region. So if you're writing a story where it's going to be taking place across country or across any large area of land, like if you're going to do United States and you're going to have elves as your core species, the East Coast species and the maybe West Coast species should have some differences. They might be the same type of person. They might, both be elves, but there needs to be differences in their belief systems and some differences, in their values. And because it's like that in real life, you can have the same group of people, but based off the region and maybe based off socioeconomic conditions, they're going to be some differences within that group, because it starts to feel unrealistic if everywhere you go in your story world, all the elves are exactly the same. That's not believable. It's not like that in real life with humans, even if they're all part of the same ethnic group. Depending on where you're going, depending on their socioeconomic condition, there's going to be differences in values and beliefs, so you need to make sure you show that in your story world. So I'm not saying you can't have a story world where you have dozens of species. You absolutely can. But what you can do is, let's say your core group is just 3 types of species. When I say core group, I don't mean core characters, but the core species that play the biggest role in your story. Let's say you have 3 and you have those fully fleshed out, but you can mention other species. They just don't have to play as big of a role. But mentioning them will give you an opportunity if later down the line in a different book, or in, let's say, a different series, but still connected to that story world, you want to more fully explore them, you can do that because you've already mentioned them before. So it's something that you can do. And also, it makes your story world seem more realistic by mentioning other types of people that exist, because otherwise it seems like your story takes place in a vacuum. So I'll use Harry Potter example here because I am currently trying to read the 4th Harry Potter book. Okay, so let me tell you the truth. I read books 1, 2, 3, 6, 7. I went back eventually and read book 5. I've never made it through book 4. I've tried maybe 3 times maybe three times to read book 4, and I think I've never made it past like page 250. It's just, to me as a reader, it's a tedious book. But I'm trying to read every book that is on my shelf, and I own hundreds of novels. So I'm like, before you start buying any more novels, Holly, you must read the ones that you own. You just have to. I broke my rule and bought a new book like last week, but I'm gonna try not to do that anymore until I read the ones that I own. So I'm thinking about Harry Potter for example, because I'm trying to read her novel, but also she has, obviously her core group of people are the Wizarding World, and she, fleshes out that story, that species a lot. She gives you a lot of information. She's not throwing it all at you at once. It's over the course of many books. But she shows diversity within that species. She gives some information on the history. And also other aspects of a culture. And she does have, obviously, if you've seen the films, even if you've seen the films, you've never read the books, there are other species in that story world. And she does mention them, but they don't play as large of a role. They're not essential to the plot in the way that witches and wizards are. So she doesn't go into great detail about their specific culture the way that she does with witches and wizards. So that's something you can do. You can have other species in your world. You just don't have to go into the detail that you do with your main species. So that's just something I wanted to say, because sometimes, fantasy authors, you get excited when you're creating a world, and rightfully so. It's super exciting. And you start throwing in, all these different species, and everybody's playing a huge role, and the reader gets bogged down with lots of complex history and customs and beliefs of like 6 or more species, and it's really hard for your reader to connect to your story world when you're throwing so much at them at once. So that's another reason why I recommend just sticking to 3 or less, because it's easier for you. You get through the story faster as a writer, and also it's easier on your reader, because unless you're a very experienced fantasy author, you're not really going to be able to introduce large quantities of species and give them the full attention they need without it seeming overwhelming and without feeling like your story is just going everywhere. So I hope that was helpful. I did do a blog post about this that's a little more organized than my YouTube videos. But if you go to hollystarkey.com, you can see it. I'll just link it down below the blog post if you want to read that. Thank you so much for watching. Again, my name is Holly Starkey, Fantasy Story Editor. And if you're interested in my editing services, I'll also have that information linked down below. And I will see you tomorrow for another video about writing, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.